Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel session today, which will be, I'm sure, pretty tame and not talking about anything very controversial at all. So just to set the context a little bit for this conversation, the deep polarization of American society has seeped onto college campuses, which is understandable because universities are a reflection of society. They represent every facet of society. So not surprising, perhaps, to see the polarization that we're seeing on campuses right now. What is different, however, is the state of free speech on campuses. It's being decried by people on the left and on the right and across the political spectrum. I think everyone can agree that civil discourse is at the heart of learning, inquiry, and the higher education mission, but I think where we don't necessarily agree is exactly what that civil discourse is. So hopefully we'll get into that a little bit in this conversation. And civil discourse, of course, is the most important thing in an election year. So without further ado, joining me on the panel is Dr. Pano Kanolos, who is the founding president of the University of Austin, and he served as the 24th president of St. John's College in Annapolis before joining the University of Austin. We then have Jackie Pfeffer Merrill, who is the executive director of the Fund for she is the Campus Free Expression Project, the director of that at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Before that, she was the executive director of the Fund for Academic Renewal and Program of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. Then we have Brandon L. Simmons, who's the chairman of the Board of Regents at Texas Southern University, and he was appointed to that role just recently in May of 2023, so about a year ago. And then finally, at the end, we have Chuck Welch, who's the president of the Association of American Colleges and Universities. After he joined, it's the state colleges and universities, isn't it? Sorry about that, Chuck. After he joined that, after serving nearly 13 years as the president of the Arkansas State University System, and he's also the past president of Henderson State University. So we have a very wide representation of the university landscape joining us today. So I'm really excited to hear what we have to say. First, I'd like to just talk about this topic of polarization on campuses. I think we can all agree that free speech and civil discourse do go together, but I'm interested to hear where you guys think the polarization on campus started and perhaps how it's evolved to this present moment. Jackie, I'm going to start with you on that one, please.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, and I want to thank the Reagan Institute for this annual event on education. One thing I wanted to say, I don't think October 7th changed things on campus, but it really was revealing about the state of things that were already present on campus, and on some, but not all campuses, the kind of erosion of civil discourse and free expression norms. So I think that there are lots of pressures. I'm sure, well, it's, COVID and the adolescent experience, people growing up in more think-alike neighborhoods, the way in which polarization seeps onto campus. But there are some universities that have not really focused on the mission of preparing people to be independent thinkers and scholars, really being able to advance scholarship, and that has eroded the abilities of some schools to have a real robust culture of open inquiry.
Okay, interesting. Chuck.
Yeah, I think it's reflective of what's happening in broader society. Mm-hmm. When you see the divisions and the polarization that we have, I couldn't help. I mean, this happened by chance, but when I walked in the building today, one of the first photos I saw was President Reagan shaking hands with Speaker Tip O'Neill. Mm-hmm. Last week, I was on the Hill, and there was one congressional office that had a photograph of Speaker Johnson shaking hands with Hakeem Jeffries. It was there to send the message he shouldn't be talking to him, right? This was not a member of Congress that is supportive of Speaker Johnson or Hakeem Jeffries. Let me be clear on that. But there was no statement. It was just an unstated way of saying, look, this guy's trying to work with the other side. Yet I walk in here today and see the exact opposite thing. And so I think this has been an evolution of what's happening in a broader society that's coming to our campuses, just like we're seeing policies that are happening at the state house level are coming from national political rhetoric. And I think that that's something that is probably it's not good for either side.
We'll get into the influence of state politics a little bit later, but Pano.
So I'm going to challenge the premise. I don't think we have polarization at universities. I think universities have become unipolar. So polarization to me implies that there are two poles and there's some sort of contested middle. I don't think in most institutions there is room for any kind of contest in the middle. I think it mostly become unipolar institutions. I don't think being bipolar, and that could be taken two ways, is a solution. I mean, we have to create multipolar institutions. So institutions where there's the broadest range of opinions and ideas shared. And to do that, you have to cultivate institutions that are essentially not reflective of society, but reflecting upon society in the most complex ways. So I would, that's what I'd say about polarization. I would also say in terms of the civil discourse, because if you don't model civil discourse in the classroom, you're not going to have civil discourse on the campus. So everything has to start in the classroom, and institutions have to be very purposeful in cultivating conversations in a classroom that that reward intellectual risk-taking, that incentivize listening, that push against the grain when everybody seems to be moving in the same direction or agreeing about things. So,
can I just ask you on the unipolarization, has it always been like that, or is there a point in your mind whenever it started shifting toward that?
1986, July 30, no, I'm just kidding. So obviously, there's what we see today has many different causes. I would say one particular strand that I've become sensitive to is the tenure process. So, when people think about tenure at universities, they think of this model where professors get jobs and they have jobs for life and they're protected, their academic freedom's protected. But the way the process works assumes that only professors are qualified to hire other professors. So the tenure process depends upon senior professors hiring their junior colleagues, then running them through a 6-year gauntlet to make sure that they like what they say and like what they do, and then giving them tenure. And so what's happened over time is we keep iterating in one political, one ideological direction. So tenure, which was meant to preserve academic freedom for tenured professors, actually stifles academic freedom because the aperture to get in for people who might disagree is closing more and more each year.
Interesting. Brandon, I'm interested to hear from you if there's a point in your mind whenever the bipolarization or unipolarization of institutions really took off.
Yeah, thanks for that question, and thank you so much to the Reagan Institute. Really excited to be here. I thought that my colleague up here, Pano, was going to take advantage of pushing the prompt a little bit, and I'm going to push it actually even more, because I think we're sitting in Washington, we're in an election year, and we're watching TV, and so we see what's happening on some campuses. And I think that there's maybe an additional polarity here, which is there certainly are campuses that have arguments on one side or the other of certain of these big political issues, often more just one side. But there are so many campuses in the country that actually are focused on economic mobility and focused on serving strivers. And when they list their top priorities, they don't really talk as much about a lot of the things that we're going to talk about on this panel. And even though my views on this panel are my own views and not on behalf of the university, I'm really excited to bring a voice from a community of strivers to this type of conversation. Because I think a lot of what I think is wrong, I think about our I've shared this story with a few people here. We had our commencement last week at Texas Southern, and many of us here have seen at our alma maters all sorts of wild occurrences at our commencements. And I was curious, especially as a new board chair. I thought, wow, if something bad happens at the commencement, I might get a call about this. And so I checked in. I said, what happened? And someone told me, the only thing that happened was there were a few people on campus handing out flyers to encourage the students to disrupt graduation on behalf of events happening in the Middle East right now. And I thought, oh no, what happened? And I was told, oh, nobody took any of the flyers from them. The people who were graduating were so proud to be graduating from college. Their parents and grandparents were so proud of that day that was the only thing that mattered to them. And so I think that's one voice that's kind of missing from this often, which is, yes, there are many, I think that one line was, preparing people to be scholars. There is also preparing people to participate in the economy, preparing people to flourish in the economy and have a stake in the system, that we all live in. And so I think when we're focused on that, we're winning. And that's the message that I have to bring.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and I think there is something to be said about where we are seeing these protests happen, mostly on private institutions, Ivy League institutions, where arguably students might have time to be in encampments for multiple days. They don't have jobs that they have to go to. It's a massive generalization, but Brandon, I just want to pick up on a point
You
that
don't have encampments at most commuter schools,
Well,
probably.
exactly.
Exactly.
So but then you also said that these conversations, like the one that we're having now, aren't happening on those campuses. So I just want to ask you to expand on that a little bit. Is it not happening because we aren't seeing this free speech crisis on those campuses, or are they perhaps not digging into these issues as much? Why do you think we're not having the civil discourse conversation on those campuses where there are strivers?
Yeah, well, I guess I didn't mean to say in any way that there are no conversations about civil discourse. I more meant to say that this topic is not showing up as one that disrupts day-to-day existence on the campus. The thing that I think of in terms of ranking issues of importance, I think about the great Gallup poll from just a few years ago that showed that globally, the most important thing to everyone is a job, a good job. That is the number one thing that people all around the world want. So I think in a sense, to your encampment point, there's a certain post-materialist element when it comes to some of the most extreme things that we see happening. There's a balance and a range of things happening, but I think the core work of teaching and learning is aimed at the journey of economic mobility. That's how I see it, at least.
Can I chime in on that? I mean, I really appreciate the kind of economic mobility, and people do go to school to get a job. And I have a son in university. I don't want him to move back into the basement. But I really think we have to defend the higher in higher education. That is a kind of as an academic core. But what the students bring in this type of institution or in our two-year community college institutions is that they're not 18 to 22. I think the average age of a student in the country is 25. And those students have one foot on campus and one foot in the community. And they already know from their experiences in workplaces and with their neighborhoods and their PTA even, I have to work with people who really think different. And I'm bringing that to campus. We don't see that as much with the people who are matriculating as 18-year-olds who spent 18 months during COVID, zooming into a classroom from their bedroom.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point. Pano, I think what you were talking about, we had a big conversation in the green room, and I think some of your points about what you're doing at the University of Austin really speak to, even in an elite university, helping students be connected to and prepared for the real world.
I want to pick up, because we've unleashed the encampment conversation, so I think we can move on to that a little bit. And part of that debate is around what is free speech, which seems like an interesting question to be asking, because surely there's an easy answer to that, but it becomes incredibly complex on college campuses. Chuck, I'm looking to you because you're representing state schools here, and I think it's a little bit different of a question to answer than for private institutions. Is there any speech under free speech freedoms that would be not allowed, in your opinion?
I think that depends on who you ask. I saw a poll recently that 90% of Americans think free speech is one of the most important rights that they have, but yet we have this significant situation where, and this is a nonpartisan comment because we're seeing it from both sides, where the content of the speech determines whether or not it should be truly free, depending on the person and where their personal ideological issues are. And we've seen it more than once on our campuses. Now, let me go back to something that Brandon said to kind of bring this home. I mean, we represent regional public universities in the United States. There are 517 regional public universities, 70% of public universities, 7 million students. We did some research on how many of those campuses had public coverage of encampments or challenges related to post-October 7th, and it was 15 of those campuses. Almost all were in large metropolitan areas. Also, many of those where it is occurring, it's largely because of outside agitators who are coming in to make it build even more. We have engaged for 20 years in a project with the New York Times, a nonpartisan project called the American Democracy Project, where we try to work with our students on the importance of civil discourse and the importance of being good Americans. Half of our students are students of color. Almost half of our students are first generation. 54% of all Pell recipients in the United States attend a regional public university. To Brendan's point, these are the students who are going to have social and economic mobility. These are the students who are going to college to learn and to get a job. But it's also a situation where most of them are members of the community. You mentioned 1 foot in the campus and 1 foot in the community. And so do those faculty members. And so do those administrators in many instances, so that you have that civil discourse going on there. That's certainly not to suggest that there's unilateral agreement. There are lots of arguments and disagreements on political ideologies and philosophies, but I think there is much better communication that is happening. That's still, though, the issue with free speech is we've got to come to some understanding that everybody has the right to their own opinion and their own statement, and that we should talk about it whether we agree with it or not. And that all goes back to my very opening statement, where we saw that in the 80s, even in our political environment. We don't see that today, and it's bleeding into some of the instances on the campuses.
Okay. Jackie, is there any speech that you think is disallowed on college campuses?
No, I would say, short of true threats or incitement,
Right.
campuses should be wide open spaces. But that doesn't mean, and academic freedom doesn't mean that kind of a pass from ensuring that the campus is a respectful, effective learning environment for everybody. To paraphrase Justice Robert Jackson, academic freedom is not a suicide pact, and the university is not a open public square, in the sense that when we hear, speech such as, calls for intifada, that's protected speech. But when that happens over and over and over, it creates an environment where Jewish students and faculty and staff can't feel, they're so distracted appropriately by that menacing environment that they can't really engage in learning. And so it's important for the universities to set a tone and say, that's protected, but it's also eroding the environment we need to accomplish our mission, which is a learning mission. It's not a public square mission.
Pano.
So I think we have to think about what the function of free speech is, and what the assumptions behind free speech are. And the assumption behind free speech in a democratic society is that human beings are rational creatures, and that to live together and to create a better society, we have to be able to exchange our ideas and opinions in a free and open way. So the purpose of speech is not to have different opinions, but to form better opinions. So beginning with that, we also have to recognize that as rational human beings interacting with each other, the appropriate mode of speech is persuasion, not coercion. So I would draw a line to say where there's speech that becomes coercive. In other words, it's not trying to make an argument or convince somebody of the rightness of an idea. It's speech used itself as a kind of battering ram. And a lot of this is contextualized, right? And I mean, just a literal example would be if there's somebody, you're in a room with somebody that says, I think Palestine should be free, and you could have a conversation with about, that's the exchange of ideas between rational human beings. If somebody's sitting across from you and says, I think Palestine should be free, and they're holding a baseball bat, you're not going to have the same conversation.
Sure.
That's true.
So language is the single most important thing that human beings exchange. And because it's so powerful, we have to make sure that it's used in a way that is persuasive and not coercive.
I think this situation has also perhaps tested universities' free speech policies and assembly policies. I'm wondering if you guys think, and Pano, I'm going to go to you because you're in the midst of setting one up. Is now a time for universities to reassess those policies that they have, or do they need to perhaps just reassert them in different ways?
So there's, I think, a difference between policies and practice and culture. So you can set up any policy you want. If it's not practice, or if you don't create the culture that enforces that or reinforces that policy, it's just paper. So universities have done for quite a long time things that have eroded the ability for universities as institutions to stand up for the exchange of ideas. One example is that every time a college president comes out and takes a side on a political issue, the university loses credibility as an open arbiter for being a place of ideas. So my hope is, we've gone really far with most universities on that front, that everybody will agree to a total reset, right? Like unilateral disarmament. No college president from here forward can say anything, and then start there. That's certainly where we're starting at the University of Austin. So I think it's important, you have to create the ambient culture that will create the conditions for civil discourse, and the civil discourse creates the conditions for free and open dialogue.
Chuck, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, what the interesting thing when we talk about free speech, and we are encouraging all of our campuses to absolutely take a look at their policies. Some of the campuses haven't looked at them in 30 years, you know, and they've just sort of, they've rolled along. And obviously to make sure that they're timely, to make sure that they're going to protect students' rights, but also protect student safeties and the safety of those in the campus community. The challenge comes in that, you know, in my home state, there was a bill filed that said you can have free speech anywhere outside. There were no longer any time, place, and manner restrictions. It had to be any open space. We said, okay. Then the next year it can also be inside any building. Well, that creates an entirely different issue that could be problematic for what the students are there in the first place, which is the learning communities, right? So a lot of campuses are having to thread those needles and make sure that you know, expanding these rights and having these zones, you're not doing it to the point that you are preventing students from being able to get the education that they are paying to receive at the institution. So I agree. So much of it is about, regardless of the policy, it's about the campus culture, and it's about the sort of how you facilitate that and the communications that you have with your students and your faculty and your staff. But I think all campuses would be wise to take a hard look to make sure that they are updated, to make sure that they're timely, and to make sure that they are satisfying those multiple things that need to be satisfied.
For a number of years, probably the past 7 or 8 years, a lot of people on certain sides of the political debate have said that there's a free speech crisis on campus. And I think that's kind of shifted as things have developed on campuses, certainly in the past 6 months. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about, well, acknowledging the hypocrisy that we can hear sometimes whenever we're talking about free speech, and how free speech means something to one person as long as you're saying something that I agree with, but if you say something that I don't agree with, then I disagree with your right to free speech. How can universities, Jackie, I'm going to go to you for this one, how can universities keep civil discourse bipartisan?
Sure. Well, I think I would want to say on a college campus, it shouldn't be bipartisan, because there's, you know, many debates which are not just left and right. There's many sides, and on some sides, left versus right is not the mix of, of things. I was recently looking at the debate between the plate tectonics people and the fixed Earth people. And it was like reading the modern debate. Somebody on one side of that debate said, people won't talk to me when I have a good of a conference anymore. So what I think is really important is to really have, at the leadership level, people modeling conversations with people with whom they really disagree. And so, I think, presidents on many campuses, like, I think Ron Crutcher at the University of Richmond, modeled having people on stage with him who had very different points of view. But I think it's also really important in the classroom level, because the faculty are on the front lines. And I think that when faculty set curriculum that include core substantive texts that really draw on a broad range of methodologies and a broad range of viewpoints, and have those conversations in their own classroom, I think that's where we make the most progress.
I love your example about plate tectonics and fixed Earth. I mean, in some ways, that is what we're talking about. And if we think of civil discourse, it's not necessarily debates like that, but that's certainly two people on either side of an argument. So would you say that that is a model that we can try to replicate when we're talking about this, that it isn't just about politics or ideologies that we're debating here? It can be as simple as plate tectonics and fixed Earth.
Oh, those people, my father was a geologist.
Okay.
And his life was changed actually by a 1957 lecture about plate tectonics at the University of Saskatchewan, and the debate around it. But I think, it's really important for us to get out the message. This is not just a humanities and social science question. There are labs that are being politicized, peer review, poster sessions, and where it's not necessarily a clear right-left question, but ideology is being introduced into lots of kinds of classrooms and labs, and that's getting in the way of teaching students, faculty advancing the frontiers of knowledge, and students learning to be independent thinkers, which is what we need for a pluralistic democracy like ours.
Interesting. Pano, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I totally disagree with, no, I'm kidding. I'm a flat earth. So let me just take that last strand, the ideology. It's incontrovertible that this thing called ideology has sort of seeped into the bloodstream of higher education, and I think probably all levels of education. What do we mean by that? The way that I would define ideology is a kind of totalizing worldview that subjugates everything else to the totalizing goal of that worldview. So, the concept of social justice is a totalizing ideology. It says, and there are institutions that say, yeah, that whole pursuit of truth thing, that was really cute for a while. It was very twee. We like truth. But what we're really here to do is pursue this end, this thing, this predetermined end called social justice. And we all have to line up and move in the same direction. That is, to me, that is the antithesis of what a university should be. You can make the case for social justice. You can make the case for anything, reparations, whatever you want to do within the context of a university. But a university exists to critique and query the very ideas that are the operating systems of society. When we allow any of those operating systems, and we could think of systems on the right as well, the left, if you allow any of those operating systems to become the operating system of the university itself, then the pursuit of truth is lost.
So Pano was telling us in the green room that he's a Shakespeare scholar, but it sounds like Plato's Republic. What of justice has to be the open question.
Yeah.
Brandon, I'm interested to get your perspective on this as someone who's a kind of a degree separated from this in terms of taking the politics out of debate and civil discourse on campuses, especially for an HBCU.
Yeah, well, actually, the question came up for me as I was just listening to Pano, because I think I heard him say, a university exists to critique society. Is that what you said?
I think it's an important function.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think it's an important function as well. Although I think the reason that people often hear me advocating for a different point is that I think that is broadly viewed as the function of the university right now. And I think we need a resurgence of a function of the university as actually preparing students to participate in the economy. I think a lot of when I think about the back and forth that Bill Ackman got in with a number of people, and Bill Ackman ends up saying at the end of it that he sees universities as having created a whole generation of students who believe that they are oppressed victims, okay? And whether you join that perspective or not, I think it's interesting to consider if a university is charging students an extraordinary amount of money to attend, they're going in debt often, and this is not a unique thing to being at a university that serves strivers. This is a broad issue in higher education. Students are going deep into debt. Very limited career services exist. Now, your university is different. You're doing great things on this. But in general, I think most of us who've attended universities did not think that we got amazing career services that pointed us perfectly in the direction of the exact job that we needed, that fit us, fit everything we were looking for, set us up to make our loan payments on time, et cetera. Did someone else get that? I didn't get that, right? Most people didn't seem to get that. And so I think there's actually a funny way in which Bill Ackman didn't take his point far enough in that way, because that mix of activities, charge a lot of money, don't have people go into debt, not have them set up to easily pay off their debt because you haven't helped them figure out how to get a job, that doesn't sound like a good setup to put students at scale in across our society. So it piqued my interest to think of, because I know you're doing more than just that, especially because I understand what you're doing as being quite amazing. You're doing more than just teaching the students how to critique society. You're teaching them how to function in society and how to succeed and flourish in society as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess, yes, absolutely.
Let me celebrate you.
Yeah,
If you,
own it.
if you have an opening on your board panel, I think I know someone who might want to apply.
I mean, critique in the broadest, so to have a critical mindset is to try to better understand something. And so if you teach students how to better understand the society in which they live, you are preparing them to flourish in that society and be professionally successful. So critique isn't to complain. I mean, maybe I want to be very clear. Universities don't exist to be the kind of antagonist to society to complain about them. They're the places where we come together to think deeply about the most important human questions and come up with better, deeper answers. And if you're training young people to do that, that applies to every context for the rest of their life.
I'd like to say something. I think that's an outstanding point and spot on. But it also raises one of the challenges that institutions are facing with a public outcry or policymaker outcry that why are we teaching all of these things that make you think critically? Why are we doing the liberal arts anymore? Why aren't we teaching what I call only widget making 101, right? But when you talk to business and industry, they tell you a completely different story. They say, we'll teach them how to make the widget. We want them to think critically. We want them to be able to problem solve. We want them to be able to communicate with one another and work in a group. And that all goes back to that core of the role of the university in civil discourse. And I think it has a direct tie to economic wealth and production, both for the individual as well as for business and industry.
So I want to push on that a little bit because to me it's a bit of a false dichotomy. I know a lot of people who are advocates of workforce education. I've never talked to anybody who says you shouldn't even be taking English or history in school. I've never talked to anybody who says that. I think the energy behind that comes from the same energy that I brought on this point. I totally agree with everything you said, and I think there's a hazard if we mainly focus on that we lose out on some of the other pieces that I think we need to see more of in education today. And I think I do join that critical thinking is something all employers are asking for. I also talk to a lot of employers who say, man, these kids show up, they don't know how to do anything. They don't even know how to respond to an email.
Right.
How can that be?
That's right.
They're on their phones all day, but they don't respond to my emails. And so I think, yes, they can teach you exactly how to make the specific widget that they make in their factory, but they do want students to arrive capable of functioning in a professional environment.
No, and I think the energy where this is coming from is not so much about I hate English, I hate history. Some of it's around the affordability conversation. Should we go to a 3-year degree? Should we go to 90 hours? If so, what do we cut? Well, the first thing that's going to get cut is probably not going to be the direct workforce education things in the minds of some. So unfortunately, I have had some say, I have no idea why we teach these classes. They learn that in high school. We need to be teaching them how to get a good job and make money. And I agree that we need to be teaching them how to get a good job and make money, but I think we also have to make sure that we're listening to what's keeping many of them from being able to do that. To your point, we had a very large business owner who owned HVAC business, and he said, "I'd just be happy if they could write out an order ticket." All right, I mean that's a sad commentary, but it's exactly what was said.
Even though we're talking about taking politics out of civil discourse on campuses, universities do not exist in a vacuum, and they exist in a bipartisan world, and especially state politics are coming into play a lot whenever we're talking about inclusion, diversity, equity, and that's something that a lot of state governors, especially ones that have graced this stage today, are taking a closer scrutinizing look at. Chuck, I wonder if this is something that concerns you, the influence and perhaps more presence of state governments within university business. Is that something that concerns you?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, I think, but I think fault's on both sides with this issue, quite frankly. I mean, I think DEI has become just a dirty word. It's a 4-letter word, quite honestly, that those who don't like it, in many cases, don't really know what it is supposed to be, and the campuses have maybe gotten away from what it's supposed to be. So I think it goes in both directions. I have met with policymakers and said, what do you not like? And they've ticked off 3 or 4 things, none of which any of our campuses do. Again, many of those all have been reserved to a very small number of campuses where these things are occurring, not occurring at the vast majority of institutions around the country. The purpose in my mind for DEI type programs is about helping any student be successful. If they're coming in and they're a student of color, if they're coming in and they're a student who maybe has different political viewpoints in an area where they're not in the majority. If it's a student that's coming in that is non-traditional, if it's a student that's coming in that's low income, if it's, I mean, any of that entire gamut, what can we do to support you to ensure that you're successful? I was a first generation college student who came from a low income background. I needed help, right? Now, obviously I was a white male, so I mean, I didn't have any issues on that particular side of it. But that's what DEI is supposed to be. I think some of our campuses have gotten away from what it's supposed to be, and then I think it's been demonized in some quarters for something that it's really not. And so I think the key is we've got to come back to that common definition. What is it you're trying to accomplish? What is it you're trying to do? I had a policymaker say to me that said, I want no carve-out programs for any special carve-outs for any students. And I said, the university in your district has the largest veteran serving program in the state. He said, well, that's not the kind I'm talking about, right? We got to get a common definition and understanding, or it's going to be problematic, and we're going to have policymakers preventing campuses from being able to help students be successful and doing it in the right way. But at the same time, I think campuses have some things that need to be cleaned up as well.
Moving beyond the DEI conversation, because I think that's a slightly different one to what we're having today. Just in terms of state influence, state government influence on universities and the university operations, is that something that concerned you, Pano?
Well, much less as a private institution.
Sure.
So, we have, a broader range of operational freedom. I'm more concerned, let's say, with the regulatory environment at the federal level that comes down through accreditation and those sorts of things. That touches all schools. The accreditation system right now is essentially a cartel set up to protect institutions that already exist. And the barriers to entry are so incredibly high that it is almost impossible to start a new university. I'll tell you that, having started a new university. I'll give one example. You cannot access any federal student grant money, like Pell Grants or student loans, federal student, until you're fully accredited, which takes, in most cases, 6 or 7 years. That means you have to start a new university, compete against all the schools that you're competing with, and you've got both your hands tied behind your back when it comes to aid that's meant to help your students, especially low-income students. You can't access it. That puts you at a radical competitive disadvantage. So that's one of the many things that are set up there. So in terms of state governments and that, I think, I'm in Texas. They're great. I love them. They've been very supportive. They're supporting new institutions, but it's the accreditation at the kind of federally backed accrediting level that worries me the most.
I've just been given the 5-minute notification, so I'm going to move on to my next question, which is just talking about where do we go from here? With the exception of just going and setting up a new institution, what should universities be doing to try to address the crisis of free speech on campus, or maybe perhaps less hyperbolic, just improving civil discourse? Jackie, can I start with you?
Sure. Well, I think this summer is an important reset moment, and I completely agree. Schools should be looking at their policies and making sure that their policies are up to date, consistent. And I'll just recommend the Carnegie Mellon University did something that could be done at Publics or Privates, an excellent policy review that's available online. But if I'm thinking about one thing for the next 3 months, have a first-year orientation on freedom of expression, because it's critical to say, when the moment students arrive on campus, you know what, this is going to be really different from anywhere else you've ever been. Religion and politics, they're up for discussion here. So.
Great. Brandon.
Yeah, I want to quote one of my favorite colleagues who frequently says, make the main thing the main thing. And in this setting, I would just say a return to student success. Really focus on delivering ROI for your students, making sure that they get the future that they were promised from higher education.
And can I ask you to expand on that a little bit? How would you link student success and civil discourse?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'm actually making a slightly different point because you told us this was probably going to be our last point. So I think I'm making the point that that is actually what we should be focused on.
Okay.
If there's a moment to reset this summer, which I think that there could be, I wouldn't come out of that moment with that as my biggest focus. I would come out of that moment noticing some folks got off track in this last period of time. What's the purpose of what we're doing here? To the extent that the purpose of it is the critique that Pano pointed out, I agree with the way that he defined the critique at the end. It's to have our students begin to understand how to think. That's different than what is the genesis of a lot of what I think we've seen here. And so that could be the main thing as well. That's part of student success. That's part of preparing students for all of the reasons that you shared as well, to be successful in the workforce, to have a stake in the society.
Okay, thank you for that. Chuck?
Yeah, I just think, I mean, we have to be mindful of infusing civic engagement and civil discourse and the importance of those things into everything that we do on the campus. We have to realize the role that we play in this. Our students, if not from us, where are they going to get it? They're not going to get it from social media. They're not going to get it from 24-hour news channels. They're not going to get it from the local coffee shop. They're not going to get it from the broader political environment. It has to come from us. And so we have to instill that culture in our faculty, in our staff, in our students. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to talk about these issues. It's okay to have different stances, but you have a role as an American to have that civil discourse, and we have to make sure that we're infusing that into the curriculum of the courses that we're teaching, into the programming that we have, exposing students to different viewpoints, some that they've maybe never considered or that they would immediately find to be problematic, and say, listen to that. But I think we have to recognize the role that we play, and that if we don't play that role, it's probably not going to end well.
Pano, final word to you, please.
I would say the first thing we have to do is recognize that freedom of speech is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. The end is, at universities, civil discourse. Civil discourse is not about two sides, one on one side, the other, and having a debate and trying to figure out who wins.
Right.
All right, one idea plus another idea shouldn't equal two ideas, it should equal better ideas. Civil discourse is the discourse that we have as human beings to create a better civil society.
There you go.
So we have to be able to speak freely to achieve that end, but we have to keep the end in sight.
Right.
Excellent. We're done for that, so please join me in thanking our wonderful panel.